Yesterday we saw that Jesus um, interacted with the Pharisees who asked him for a sign. He refused because he had given them so many signs and realized that they had decided they wouldn't accept a sign. Now today he's with the disciples who the last time he asked them to do something said, we can't. It's kind of the same thing, not exactly, but in both cases, neither party was willing to act on the belief that they had or what Jesus was telling them. So, Mark chapter 8, verse 14, the disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf that they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. They discussed this with one another and they said, it's because we have no bread. Interesting. Now, let's look a little bit at their answer. Why would, when Jesus talks about the yeast of the Pharisees, why would they come to the conclusion that he says that because they didn't have any bread? Well, we have to realize that Pharisees in Jesus' time was not a full-time position, except for the very, very few people like Gamaliel, Shammai, and Hillel in the years before Jesus. These were full-time Pharisees who spent their day walking around teaching. The average Pharisee had his regular job. He was a Pharisee as a hobby. He was a Pharisee as kind of a political party, a religious persuasion. He listened to Pharisees and followed their teachings, but he had a full-time job. I think the disciples thought, okay, Jesus is talking about Fred the Pharisee who's a baker, and he wanted us to get more bread, but he's mad at the Pharisees, so he doesn't want us to buy from Fred the Pharisee who's a baker. Jesus says, what are you talking about having no bread? Don't you see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? Don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets did you have? 12. When I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces, leftovers, did you pick up? 7. Don't you still understand? How many pieces of bread do you have? 1. Do you think that's not enough for me? You know, put that way, we definitely see it from Jesus's point of view. But what is he talking about? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. The disciples were familiar with yeast. What happened in every Israelite house, every Jewish house in the first century, every day, is mom would get up in the morning, she would take a lump of flour and turn it into bread. She would knead it, get it ready, and then she would take a handful of yesterday's bread with yeast in it. She'd put that in the dough. She would massage it in. She'd knead it in. She'd work it in. She'd set it aside, let it raise, break it down, knead it in again, let it raise. Then she would take a fistful out, set it aside for tomorrow, and with what she had, leavened dough, she would break that day's bread. Tomorrow she'd get up, work the dough again, take yesterday's yeasted dough and work it in. Every day of their lives until the week of unleavened bread. And that's kind of the Lord's way of saying, renew yourself every year. Get some new leaven at least once a year. Yeast works through the whole dough. A little goes a long way. What Jesus was saying was, be careful of what the Pharisees are saying, because that can influence you too. The Pharisees are saying no sign is good enough. There are other explanations for everything that happened. The danger is that the disciples might pick up on that too. The disciples already lean towards just looking at what they have and trying to fix it themselves, instead of relying on Jesus to provide solutions for their needs. We live in a culture that's very much like that. I came from a culture in which doctors were there, but public doctors were unreliable, hard to get into, and private doctors were way too expensive. In Colombia, where we served, people would pray for healing and mean it. Today, we pray for healing when nothing else works. We go to our doctors, we go to our medicines. If none of that works, then we ask for healing. In Colombia, they would pray for healing as soon as they got sick. You know what? I like that. We need to develop the practice of looking to Jesus first, not second, third, or last. What do you need today? Go to him. Look to him. Believe that he can provide. He wants to provide. Let him do it. On Sunday, Jesus takes this story, this principle, just one step farther when he heals a man who was blind in front of the disciples. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. God bless you.